Well, hey, welcome back to the bite-sized Bhagavad Gita. Today we're looking at chapter 16. Thank you very much for coming along so far on this journey, friends. Hopefully I am speaking with the friends who have already come along on the journey so far. That will give a bit of connotation, cultural context to that which I am presenting now, because we are almost done. We're almost there. 17, 18, and that's the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. The 17 is a little bit more reflection upon the three qualities of material nature, which characterizes the Hindu pantheon, the Hindu trinity, which is sort of like a refinement of chapter 14. Chapter 16, this is the yoga of the division between the demonic and the divine natures. It's kind of expected, I assume, that there is going to be a good and evil dichotomy in a religious text, right? And that wouldn't be a false conception. The point to make is the wording and the flow of Mercury and the connotations of which the wording. Let's call it the wording. It's not. The emphasis shouldn't be on the good and evil aspects of it, it's rather the qualitative aspects. So there's a bit of a philosophical buddhi, intellect. That's the discernment that only Krishna can make. He gives this to Arjuna, the division between the qualities of the demoniac and the divine. So the divine qualities, peacefulness, truthfulness, wisdom, tranquility, forbearance. They've been explained quite a few times in the chapters leading up to do so, and of course, a practice which maintains the capacity for one's aspiration to refine those particular qualities. Okay, and yeah. So the division is then made with that in mind, right? So there's one assumption that the previous chapters have described exactly what it is that is considered to be a heavenly quality. Krishna has given this to Arjuna, so it shouldn't be too far off. And therefore, that leads one to expect that there ought to be a description of the demoniac qualities. Those qualities are basically, in short, in a bite-sized Bhagavad Gita piece, that it's quite simply that which is intrinsically antagonistic to the will of God, to a practice, as forementioned, meditative composure, devotion, right understanding, right action, so forth, which is directly contrary to the will, is known as a demoniac quality. Krishna says quite clearly, and it's a bit more, it's explained that those who do not know how to act, right? So that assumes that it's actually to not know how to act means basically to not know how to dovetail one's actions into the service of the Supreme, to dovetail one's actions. A friend of mine actually asked me to describe this chapter for them. And so I'm sort of aspiring to lead up to that, to give my sort of interpretation about it. And the fact is that, there are those who are, sometimes we forget, what it is that we're doing, and it's very easy to lose faith. And because Krishna is so close to us in our hearts, it's very easy to forget that we are supposed to be serving the inner aspirations, some of which aren't always divine, but the qualities that shape one to become their best person, right? So we forget that, and we get tangled up, as described in the material bondages of the previous chapters. We get forgetfulness, and that we assume that we're doing things for our own sake, and that not knowing how to act, we assume that we can do it all ourselves and we don't rely on the Lord. The Lord Krishna says quite clearly that, do your best and I'll take the rest. I carry what we have and I preserve what we lack. So it's acting with faith. That doesn't mean to be effortless and just, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just a game. It's all going to perish anyway. It's all nothingness. The Lord's creation, the preservation, he'll take care of it himself. I'll just rock up and whatever. So there's a bit of wisdom that's required. It's an actual sacrificial act. It's not. It's the sacrificial act that the Aztecs took place in the climbing of this tower and had their children sacrificed to the sun god. The exact same thing in the Aztec culture was happening in the Vedic culture with the mind. Like, you're sacrificing your misconceptions in honest integrity towards, well, to be replaced by truth and wisdom and compassion and love. So, to not know how to act, that means that we're assuming that there is no deity, there is no love in this creation. Now, I'm not going to get too caught up in that. The Buddhism kind of refined that a little bit more for what is said, arguably, the Aryan race, who are very much in our minds that jnana yoga is perhaps the regimented discipline for our particular bodily functions of energy and so forth, that we ought to be thinking correctly. And so the Buddha came to define the Eightfold Path, as it were, for that. But it's a bit more vague at the same time. It's a bit more broad. There are demoniac qualities in nature. And this isn't to say that the burden that they're like, I'm looking into Hinduism and I've never found any speak of the word the devil. So perhaps this is the idea of the devil, that, the Chinese say that evil that is named is no longer evil. So there is no talk of the devil in Hindu culture. Instead, is a different kind of capitulation. Obviously there are good and bad things, but to speak of the devil would, I think, instantly that becomes like something that's contrary to my will. Therefore, it's used for a kind of cultural coercion, and an ethic is stemmed out of that, and it becomes part of a cultural, social control mechanism, essentially. So there's a lot of free will that can be revealed in the practice of these Hindu scriptures, a lot of free will. And that itself can be scary. In all of existence, there are realms of activity that we look for ways to manifest the will of Krishna, to give to Krishna. There are bad things in nature, and that shouldn't be disregarded. It should not be disregarded. It's quite extensively described here, and there is a bit of mercury flowing, so, giving themselves over to unmeasured thought whose end is death, but regarding the gratification of desires as the highest, feeling sure that this is all held in bondage by hundreds of ties of expectation, giving over to lust and anger, they strive to obtain by unlawful means hordes of wealth for sensual enjoyments. Okay? But it isn't to say that sensual enjoyment is wrong. It's quite clear, it's just like a closed-ended thing. Because one can falsely assume that the joy and satisfaction that comes from pleasing the senses to be pleasing the higher self. It is a little bit for a small amount of time, but it's not really eternal. And the eternal isn't really always pleasing. So there's a bit of reality, a bit of grittiness that needs to be tasted. And, Krishna says to Arjuna, there's nothing to worry about. You're already here. You're already an attained, you have beautiful qualities about you. You mustn't worry too much. But yeah, so that next level of understanding takes place where Arjuna, do you remember that this is the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and Arjuna, seeing these two opposing forces, it isn't necessarily that they're good and bad forces. So this takes a bit of wisdom, and it's really interesting as well. Just a side note, the fact that Krishna says that, let me take care of that. And the fact of the matter is quite simply that within both sides are good and evil. So, just carry on doing what you're doing, and not to get too caught up in the confines of the body, the extensions of the body, and that I am within everybody. That Krishna, I am within, and those who disregard me are possessing demoniac qualities. So that's that. It's a tricky subject to touch. It's a tricky one to talk about. And yeah, so let's just pray. Let's pray. Hare Krishna.